Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Human Rights Campaign, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There is more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by almost 18,700 people from 137 countries, and it's supported by 349 organizations. As well as signatories, we have activists. WHRC has country contacts in 38 countries engaged in defending women's rights. If you would like to get involved in WHRC, please fill in the form that we will post in the chat. This week, we have Rowena from New Zealand, Susanne Bischoff from Germany, Linda Blade from Canada, Ishigami from Japan. Hello, Rowena. We would like you very much to tell us about the draft guidelines for transgender participation for all sporting bodies in New Zealand and how they are placing inclusion above all else. Also, if you could tell us how are events developing regarding participation of males in women's events, and do you know of any other planned actions you could share with us? Because we understand that you have recently launched a campaign, and we also would like to know how that's going.
We started being involved in this process last year when World Rugby brought out their trans eligibility guidelines. We sent their policy and the summary of their research to as many sporting organisations around New Zealand as we possibly could. We also sent a slightly revised version of the policy coach Linda Blade uses for Athletics Alberta as a suggestion of how they could protect female athletes. What we hadn't realised until earlier this year is that Sport New Zealand had actually drafted a trans inclusion policy and were about to post it on their website without any consultation with anyone before they started getting contacted by all these sporting organisations who'd been in touch with concerns about transgender inclusion. Then New Zealand Rugby rejected World Rugby's guidelines and basically decided to embark on developing their own policy with Sport New Zealand. And so Sport New Zealand thought while they were developing the New Zealand Rugby policy, they would get the consultants to also develop transgender participation guidelines for all sports. So they set a consultation process to do that, which involved 9 rainbow organisations, 3 academics. One was a trans woman who teaches hospitality, another one teaches gender studies, and one amazing professor who knew what she was talking about. A number of sporting organisations were involved as well, a lot from Australia, who basically developed their policies without any consultation with the public at all. And we were involved too, but unfortunately the consultants decided to ignore everything that was said that didn't fit the outcomes they wanted, and they've ended up developing a policy that places inclusion above all else. It basically states that people can participate in the category of sport that they wish, use the changing rooms that they wish, that their biological sex cannot be questioned or talked about. So the disappointing part of it is that the whole policy, and basically it says exactly the same thing as their draft policy that we've managed to get through an Official Information Act request that they developed last year. It says essentially the same thing, but it's now there's 12 different principles that they work through. But every single example and scenario that they give in these guidelines is looked through the lens of a transgender person. Not once does it acknowledge the implications on the sporting clubs and how they manage this, because how do they manage knowing where people should fit and the health and safety of the athletes participating. It doesn't acknowledge the impact on volunteers having to deal with these issues, because there's so many things. How do they stop males going into female changing rooms? Because if they challenge them and they say, no, we're trans women, then the volunteers will basically be in trouble because they've misgendered somebody. But most importantly, it doesn't recognise the implications on female athletes. And it's from the fairness perspective, it's from the safety perspective, it's from the opportunities, but it's also really from, most importantly, the participation perspective. We already have a massive drop-off of females involved in sports through their teenage years. And we also know that young women are very body conscious through that period of time. It's bad enough getting changed in front of other females, let alone having a male body in your changing rooms. And if they don't believe that or they're not comfortable in their changing rooms, they don't believe there's any point in participating because they're not going to win or have those opportunities, they might just not bother. So it's just really disappointing how many opportunities will potentially be lost to male bodies, but just how little thought was given to females through the whole development of this policy. So when the draft came out, I think Sport New Zealand were trying to keep it all very under the radar. They didn't really want anyone to know it was out, but they didn't make it confidential. So we published it on our website. We also sent it out to every single sporting association that we had contact details for with our thoughts on it. We then actively started campaigning with an open letter to our Minister of Sport, asking that they extend the consultation of the guiding principles so that it actually included all of our sporting associations and all of their stakeholders, so they had the opportunity to provide feedback to it. We managed to get over 70 Olympians, New Zealand Olympians and retired elite athletes to sign that letter, which was just incredible. And even after it was sent, names kept coming in as well of athletes who wanted to sign. So it was amazing to have that support. Unfortunately, our Minister for Sport has written off the letter completely, basically saying that we were trying to conflate community sports with elite sports, which we weren't, because community sports is the pipeline to elite sports. So if girls miss out on opportunities at community level, they will never, ever have opportunities at the elite level. But he has used that argument all the way through and basically just written off our concerns. We also had a parliamentary petition that we put online on Parliament's website here in New Zealand. It was only on for, I think, 12 days, and we got 5,311 signatures on it, which was pretty amazing. So we presented that on Parliament steps and got quite a bit of media around that. We've also raised awareness on social media through just boosting posts, like asking people to contact their local, regional and national sporting organisations, as well as Sport New Zealand, to let them know their thoughts. So we're really trying to just highlight this issue, and in a weird way, Hubbard has actually done us a favour because it's triggered, the inclusion of Laurel Hubbard in the Olympics, a 43-year-old biological male in the Olympics, has actually triggered so many people because they can see how unfair it is. And so that's actually helped raise the profile. And after sending out press releases to journalists and never being acknowledged for the past sort of 18 months, all of a sudden they started contacting us for comment, which was just fantastic. So it kind of feels like we've made progress, but it's interesting. We had a journalist here in New Zealand at Stuff Tonight publish a defamatory article that was actually incorrect, accusing us of using images that we didn't have the authorization to use. We'd actually purchased those images, so we had full authorization to use them, but she still published the article without getting confirmation from us that what she was publishing was correct. And so there's definitely, I think, because we've started gaining some profile now and we're getting some traction, there's definitely quite a big push to take us down as well.
Not only the Olympic Games, because Harvard is going to have international repercussions. Even here in Spain, the weightlifting federation is concerned about that case because it's going to affect Spanish athletes competing at the Olympics. But is there anything else at New Zealand level that you would like us to know about the proposed changes in legislation, for instance?
Yeah, so we've also got sex self-ID that our government's trying to push through, as I know your government in Spain is as well, and they're looking to do that in around August. So we've been holding meetings with Speak Up for Women, who's our women's rights group here, around the country, trying to raise awareness of that. It's really interesting with Hubbard because at the end of the day, the IOC developed really flawed rules. They know those rules are flawed, and they say that their guidelines are a living document, yet even after knowing they were flawed well over probably 18 months to 2 years ago, they haven't changed them. And they said that it would be unfair to those athletes that had already qualified through that criteria. What about the unfairness to all the female athletes who have missed out? Now, we've had a weightlifter in New Zealand who has quit weightlifting. You know, she dropped a weight category, like lost a hell of a lot of weight and dropped a weight category to try and avoid having to compete against Hubbard, but it was just too much, so she's quit. You know, so the inclusion of males in female sport comes at the exclusion of females. It's a zero-sum game, you know, and yeah, it's just, I think the Olympics are incredibly disappointing with how they've acted on this. And as we understand it too, the International Weightlifting Federation wanted more research on this when this rule was decided, but they didn't have the money to do it. So it was just flagged. And they went with what the IOC had said. So yeah, everyone knows it's wrong. We've got a whole lot of people justifying it, especially sporting leaders, whether it's because they feel they have to or they're just virtue signaling, I don't know, but it's incredibly frustrating.
Is there any legislation about, they are trying also to enhance the definition of what a hate crime is, about what hate speech is. So are you in trouble in New Zealand for speaking against these kind of things, especially in sports with Hubbard? Because I mean, not everyone know that he's very wealthy, from a very wealthy, influential family. So maybe that could explain how these policies came to be. Are you in trouble for speaking out about this? Because
interestingly, as well as the sex self-ID legislation the New Zealand government's trying to push through, they're also trying to push through hate speech legislation, and gender identity will be a protected identity within the hate speech laws. So yes, we all kind of have a giggle and say, well, we'll be in prison this time next year, but yeah, so we're fighting against, we feel like we're fighting on all fronts at the moment, actually. The hate speech legislation that will actually stop us speaking our truth, you know, because it will be hate speech to say that trans women shouldn't be able to compete in women's sport, you know, and or calling trans women biological women will be hate speech potentially as well. Sorry, biological men will be hate speech. So yeah, we are fighting on quite a number of fronts at the moment, and yeah, we just hope that we get some wins. And I think the more that we shine light on this with the general public, the more chance we have, because we've had, interestingly, one of our breakfast shows, when all the Olympic and elite athletes signed our open letter, it kind of gave the media confidence to start talking about this, because they had all been censoring themselves because they are also nervous to touch the issue. But having all those athletes, those incredible athletes, sign that letter gave the media confidence to actually discuss it. And one of our main breakfast shows put up a poll asking whether trans women should be able to compete against cis women in sport. And 92% of New Zealanders said no. And it was one of their biggest polls they've ever had. So again, that gave people more confidence to speak about it, because we all know that the majority of people know it's unfair and are willing to say that it's unfair. It's just that we have sporting leaders and a government that is just so busy virtue signalling and being trans inclusive that they're being woman exclusive and they're just not seeing the issues, unfortunately. So hopefully we'll keep campaigning. We've got we're about to do a massive mail out to all the sporting associations we've got contacts for around New Zealand, and we're going to basically send them a flyer. We've done email, so now we're doing posts. We're trying to get them on all fronts so that they have to acknowledge the issues, and we're going to challenge them to protect female sport in the female sports category, basically.
We will go to the next speaker, who is Linda Blade, our Linda Blade from Canada, former Olympian athlete. Linda is a sports performance coach and mentor, and Linda is promoting her new book, Unsporting. Of course, it's with a very, very clear subtitle, How Transactivism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport. Linda, what's your book about? With this subtitle, we can guess. Why did you write it, and why should women read it?
Basically, I wrote this book with co-author Barbara Kay, who's a very well-known journalist in Canada. You can get the book at unsporting.com. You can go there, unsporting. So the big word, unsporting.com. And I guess basically I'm going to cover three things. Why I wrote the book, or really what it's about. And then secondly, my letter to Japan, to the Japanese people. And then finally, what you can do about it. So it's pretty simple, three things. The book itself is really about the colonization of women's sports by men and the absolute lack of accountability by the authorities in sport. They just have, it's incredible what's happened. And the key elements of the book are, I would say the first part of the book was really stories about the trans identified males who really got my attention, and with my background in sports as a coach caused me to absolutely want to rebel, because it's just so ridiculous. And so, we go through some stories like Fallon Fox, who's the MMA fighter from the USA, who fractured a woman's skull when he's fighting with her, and then he's enjoying it, he says. And then we have Kelly Morgan from Wales, who's, a truck driver by day and rugby player in the women's rugby by night, or whatever, after work, and folding women like deck chairs on the field. And everybody's so on his team, so proud of him. And then we have Hannah Mounsey, who's from Australia, who's a huge man, 6'2" Hulk. And basically, he says that our objection to his big size in women's sports sends the message that, quote unquote, big girls don't belong in sports. That's his rationale for why we're all being bigots. And then we have Rachel McKinnon, Veronica Ivy, who we all know about, women's master cycling champion, and actually a professor, happens to be from Canada, to my utter shame. He uses the logic that, like so many different ridiculous things he's said, and as a thinking professor, you'd think that he should be ashamed, but he basically says that because gymnasts are small, female gymnasts are small, and female high jumpers are tall, men should be in women's sports because of their range and body size, like utterly ridiculous things. And so then this leads to ridiculous policies, right? The policies of the International Olympic Committee, where you only have to live as a woman for 1 year, as if that means anything. It's just stereotypes, and keep their testosterone lower than 10 nanomoles, when most women aren't even up to 2 or 3, or not even actually 1 or 2. So doping, essentially, allowing males to come into women's sports and still be doping. And then we have stupid organizations in Canada, Canadian Center for Ethics in Sport, Canadian Women in Sport, university sports, that are advocating something more extreme even than the Olympic policy, which is no surgery, no requirement for hormones, nothing. In fact, the policy that was being pushed on my organization in Canada, which seems to shock people, so I'll read it again, is, quote, this is actually a statement from the policy: trans individuals should be able to participate in the gender with which they feel most comfortable and safe, which may not be the same in each sport or consistent in subsequent seasons. So you could be a man in one sport 1 year and a woman in another year and a man in another year. Like, you can switch back and forth between sports because gender is fluid. So, you can just flow between categories. So this is the ridiculous thing that I was reading that got me peaked in the first place. And actually the Olympics committee, there was a hint that they're even going to consider this extreme radical policy after the Olympic Games. So we'll see, but I'm hoping they go the other way, of course, and fix it to something rational. And then the book goes on to talk about a brief history, briefly, the history of women in the Olympic Games and how the gatekeeping happened. And then how the tide was beginning to turn because of what World Rugby did, which was amazing. World Rugby was the first organization that finally, really did a good study on, and had people advocating on both sides of the issue at the table, which was the right thing to do. And of course, they found out there was no evidence whatsoever that you can give hormones to a man and make him, bring it down to the level of women. And then talking about the last chapter is, of course, how President Biden erased women, which is disgusting, with his sort of gender identity instead of the Title IX biological sex. And then at the end of the book, I offer solutions. And the main solution that we all agree on, I think, when I go across the board on social media, the main solution is very simple. You can include everybody by having an open category and one that's restricted to females. So anybody who's not 100% female and with the right, hormones and everything, they should feel free to compete in the open. And I think that would resolve a lot of things. So then the second part of this presentation is supposed to be talking about, and of course I want to talk about, the letter to the Japanese people and to the Japanese Olympic Organizing Committee. And really what I wanted to do was, I think the purpose was really fundamentally to help the Japanese, or really give them the heads up so they could avoid the shame now that's being cast upon the Olympics by Laurel Hubbard. Because imagine that a country spends billions of dollars on infrastructure and bringing the games to their country, and then the only thing that's going to be remembered about this Olympic Games is the controversy about one single trans person. And it's just such a disservice and a shame. And the Japanese people deserve better. So I wrote this letter that's been translated now into English, Japanese, French, Italian, and Dutch, and being shared around the world. And basically it just has two things emphasizing, well, first of all, two things that I wanted to expose, the two lies. The first lie is that hormone therapy does not mitigate the advantage. So this is a lie by the IOC that somehow giving a male hormones for a year and bringing his hormones levels down make him any less of an advantage, which it doesn't. The males are still heavier by 20 to 40%. They're still stronger by like almost 50 or 60%, more explosive. You go right down the line. The most extreme one is they are 160% greater punching capacity. Imagine that, 160% higher than women in the way they can punch. So, even in like their heart and their lungs, like you're not going to change those sizes. It's very obvious that you're not going to suddenly have 2 inches smaller bone length just because you think you're a woman. So there's some very obvious things. And then the second lie that the IOC tries to perpetrate is that, oh, but it's only going to be a few and it's not going to really impact anybody. Just be nice. No, even one person like Laurel Hubbard displaces many, many women. And we know over the last few years, and the IOC must have seen this, that there are dozens and almost now 100 trans women that are clearly visible in women's sports. And so this lie that men just won't take advantage of it is absurd, because we're seeing it already. So, it's just it's impossible to explain the frustration that people like me in sport who have been coaching for so many years. It's frustrating. And we still want to work hard to preserve the integrity of women's sports. So what can we do? So third thing, how can you help? Well, I want, if anybody's there, there's you can look it up. There's a website I've created because I was so outraged by the fact that one trans woman, trans-identified male, I shouldn't say trans woman because not a woman, one trans-identified male, Joanna Harper, did a study of 8 athletes, 8 not even athletes, recreational runners, and on the basis of a very flawed study, which you will see in the book, caused the IOC, got brought into the IOC Medical Commission and was allowed to just listen to, and they took this person as an expert, and the entire policy, think about this, the rules for all the world, for all women in all sports, was changed on the basis of a flawed study of 8 men. So N equals 8. I have a website that sort of addresses this issue, that's particular outrage, and it's you can find it at N, capital N equals EQUALS 8.com. And that's a website that you can go to read about the outrage of these 8, this study, that stupid study that the IOC based their entire policy on this study. And so on that website, there are letters that you can download and send to your leaders. And so I would encourage you to maybe send a letter to your leader or a local sports leader or your prime minister or your president. And also there is a sample letter that you can send to the International Olympic Committee, to President Thomas Bach. And the address is on that site where if you click on IOC. That's one thing. You can write letters as a group, as an organization, or as a petition and send it in. You can support women's groups who are fighting hard, like Rowena Edge. You just saw Row. What a great amount of work she's doing in New Zealand, and Catherine Deeves in Australia. So this Save Women's Sport, and Beth Stelzer has been amazing in the United States with all of her activism. She's enabled and participated in the states having Save Women's Sports bills. So Save Women's Sports organizations, please support them financially or offer to help. Fair Play for Women in the UK is a very important organization, has done so much amazing work for our side. And of course, this group, Women's Declaration. I mean, we are the most widespread group in the world of women talking to each other. So please support Women's Declaration and spread the word, and Women's Human Rights Campaign. Kara has an idea of demonstrating in front of the NBC, which is the network for the Olympic Games. And there's an outlet in Washington, D.C. I just can't really find anybody who wants to head that up and just go down there and stand in front of the NBC studios and just say, look, just be there. Just demonstrate about the fact that there's male bodies in women's Olympic sports. And don't let these networks get by with, doing this kind of stupidity, like showing all these things without actually understanding the issue. I think the more that we can shine a light on this, the more the IOC will be ashamed of themselves. And I think that's the whole point. They aren't listening to us when we be nice, but when we shame them, maybe they'll come to the table. And I guess as we go along, I'll be adding things to that particular website about what you can do. As it becomes apparent to me. I don't know all of the answers yet, but I want to thank all the women here who support us and who support women's sports. It's kind of ridiculous. I'll just say in closing, it's kind of ridiculous that this woman in the States, the 100-meter runner, Sha'Carri Richardson, now can't compete in the Olympics because of tiny little bit of THC in her body that was discovered upon the anti-doping test. In the old days, I would have said, fine, like if you break the rules, you break the rules, but not anymore. Because if you let men into women's sports, what difference does it make with one little molecule of THC in a woman's blood? So they've changed the entire equation in my mind. They've changed it. Canadian women who wasn't going to be allowed, a basketball player wasn't going to be allowed to go to the Olympic Games because she's breastfeeding her child, and you're not allowed to have babies in the Olympic Village. Whereas that's also, police. But so, and then bathing caps for afros, like for African American women. I mean, these things are ridiculous. So you police women to the minute microscopic degree, but men can do whatever they want. And this is the message that they're sending us.
Now we're moving on, and we are going to talk to Uno Ishigami, who is here. She's a radical feminist from Japan, the country we've been mentioning several times today because they are hosts of the Olympic Games. Please, can you give us any overview of the situation in Japan in general about gender identity?
Yes. Hello, my name is Uno Ishigami. This is my pseudonym, and I'm wearing a mask and glasses today because if my real name, face, and workplace are revealed, there is a fear that extremists may spread my personal information and I will not be able to live peacefully. I'm an ordinary citizen working for a nonprofit organization. It was only last year that I started to speak out about women's rights. I decided to do so because I was terrified by the rapid spread of transgenderism in Japan and the fact that most famous feminists support it. In Japan, ordinary anonymous women like myself are active mainly on Twitter to cope with transgenderism. Some of us have been doing this for as long as 3 years. We are spreading what is happening in countries where gender identity laws and systems have already been introduced. We are protesting against attempts to make a kind of LGBT equality laws in Japan, as it will surely diminish the rights of women. We are thinking, communicating, and sharing information about how transgenderism is a problematic ideology. From my point of view, the promotion of transgenderism is led by gender academics in Japan. The quick spread of the belief in transgenderism has made us women realize how superficial and concept-centered the current Japanese feminism is. It ignores the biological reality of women. It is easily influenced by media and commercialism. For these academics, radical feminism and Marxist feminism are only object of study, not a guide for their own lives. Trans rights activists have been around for about 15 years and have strong ties to political parties and worlds of academia, publishing, education, and speech. So our side have been lagging behind. For the past 3 years, it has been difficult for us to get people to believe us when we say that women's rights are in danger.
Is there much awareness of the problem amongst the Japanese general public? If there is, what has made them aware and how they are responding?
Before I discuss the issue of trans women athletes participating in women's sports, let me tell you how this Olympics is considered in Japan. Several polls show that there are far more people who oppose or want to postpone the Olympics than those who want to hold them this year. The spread of the new coronavirus has not been controlled and vaccinations are not yet fully available. Okay. Above all, the healthcare workers are so exhausted that they will be crushed under the burden of working for Olympic and the spread of the disease if the Olympics are held. Therefore, many Japanese people have negative feelings about the Tokyo Olympics. The New Zealand weightlifter, Rowena Hubbard, here, was reported on TV news shows as well as on the web media like this. Many people in Japan had seen them. Although the TV program took the stance of introducing the pros and cons of trans women's participation in women's sports, the general public who saw the news overwhelmingly said in the comment section of the web news and on social media that sports should be played according to one's sex, not gender. These voices are so overwhelmingly huge that it doesn't even spark any controversy. So one-sided. In Japan, it is the ruling party that wants to hold the Olympic and opposition party against it. And the people on the opposition side are the ones promoting transgenderism. So while there have been some articles that defend Rowena Hubbard and other trans women athletes, they have not led to a huge support for Hubbard and others. Trans rights activists have also been reluctant. Japanese media tend to focus only on Japanese athletes. Hubbard, who competes in a weight class that does not compete with Japanese strong athletes, so it is still seen as other countries' problem or the world's problem that is going crazy. Not many people have realized that not only the Olympics, but also women's sports are in danger in all over the world, including Japan. Also, Japan is the host country of the Olympics, so we are in a position to treat all the people who have been sent to Japan in the same way. International goodwill must be based on respect for others. In other words, respect for all athletes and the countries that send them. This is the reason why we cannot actively oppose trans women's athletes' Olympic participation in Japan, even though there are opinions about it. I hope you will understand our situation. Last November, a video of Serena Sol, an American high school girl who appeared for fairness in women's sports, became a hot topic on Twitter in Japan. Not only people who had been interested in gender issues, but also a wide range of people learned about this issue. Therefore, I would like to extend my gratitude and respect to Selena for her courage.
Thank you very much. You've been talking about the political situation and how the party in government is supporting the Olympics and the party in opposition is not supporting, but at the same time it's the party in the opposition that is supporting the inclusion of males in women's sports because they are pro trans rights, so-called trans rights. So, but aside from the political party, are there sports association or other female athletes, scholars, any prominent figures that could be publicly favoring that?
Well, there are people in academia who'd like to promote such idea that including trans women in women's sports. And there are many liberal feminists who support those academics. What is noteworthy is that there are already concrete guidelines for the treatment of transgender athletes in schools. Here's the pamphlet made by the Japan Sports Association. The Japan Sports Association is a very large and authoritative public interest incorporated foundation that coordinates and supervises sports in Japan. It organized the annual National Sports Festival and certified sports leaders. This is a pamphlet published by such great foundation. You can download it in PDF format from the website. In this pamphlet, they take it for granted that people can join in the sports based on the gender identity. In Japan, there are various requirements for legislative gender reassignment, such as surgery, but the pamphlet goes further than what the law stipulates. The pamphlet says, and this is the extract from the English version of the pamphlet. The pamphlet says, in basketball, tall athletes are not excluded from competition on the ground that their height is unfair advantage. Similarly, with respect to the sex characteristics, it is necessary to create a system that recognizes that both women and men are born with a variety of body traits, and with regard to gender identity, it is necessary to create a system that allows them to compete according to their identity. It also says in other pages, with all respect to transgender persons and individuals with DSDs, it is important to respect the gender identity of the concerned individuals. If you are consulted, listen to the person's wishes and give the highest priority to that person's intention rather than their outward appearance or biological gender. In this way, they are mixing up the description of people with DSDs like Kester Semeyer with that of transgender. If on the field and in practice, sports readers and people involved in sports start to think and act on gender identity based on such pamphlets, the field of education will change without waiting for a new LGBT equality law to be created. I am worried that policy of making things easier for transgender youth will go too far and have a big negative impact on biological women.
Apart from the Olympics, what is the main concern of Japanese rad femmes? And of course, how can sisters in other countries support you?
Our biggest concern is about the new LGBT law in Japan, which is about to be created. It was stopped for a while, yet the situation has not yet settled. The problem is so huge that we completely focused on it, so we actually cannot do any project concerning Olympics. There is a high possibility that the new law will lead to the introduction of self-ID system in Japan. The bill uses the term gender identity, which has never been the legal term in Japan before. The push for the new LGBT law comes from big businesses, the media, and political parties, especially the opposition parties. 14 political giants are also saying things with a nuance that Japan should promote transgenderism. This includes the British ambassador to Japan and the US president. This is the tweet by the British ambassador to Japan. It was made on June 4th, when Japan is in the middle of political controversy that LGBT law need to be made soon or need to take time to consider the content well. Her words, political leadership is also essential, meant to push the early enactment of the new LGBT law, even though in UK, system that based on gender identity ideology began to collapse. Therefore, dear sisters, when you find out that your representatives are pressuring other countries to promote transgenderism, please criticize them. We need your help. Transgenderism is a colonialism of women by men. And if it will be imposed by other countries, it will be colonialism in a double sense. We are all gazing with fear how things will turn out by the current change in indication of US passport concerning gender. As I said, in the front line of anti-transgenderism in Japan is Twitter. Please follow the radical feminists in Japan, ask questions and offer encouragement. People in Japan will follow you too. Let's make contact with each other. Well, in that demo, they expressed their outrage over sexual violence, women exposed based on their biological reality, outrage over inequality between men and women, and outrage over the transgenderism. And also, my Twitter account is this. It's so, and I would be happy if you follow me or send me DM. And well, finally, I would like to tell you that we Japanese radical feminists receive wisdom and courage from the action of our sisters abroad. Thank you for your continued support.